Some of the most important decisions in filmmaking don't happen in front of the cameras, but behind them, in the editing room. It's there in the technical and silent darkness that directors and editors shape the final narrative, cutting scenes, lines, and even entire characters. What may seem like an insignificant detail often makes the difference between critical success and complete failure. A simple cut can eliminate an embarrassing moment, save the story's pacing, or preserve a character's integrity in the eyes of the audience. Throughout the history of cinema, there have been surprising cases of films that nearly stumbled over their own ambition, but were saved by a single well-placed edit. In each of these cases, the change was so precise that many don't even realize the impact it had on the final result. But in the end, how far can one small editorial decision alter the fate of an entire movie? Hello, curious minds. I'm Code, and this is Discover It, where curiosity knows no limits. Subscribe and help the channel grow, because every time you like, comment, or share, you're helping us bring these discoveries to more people. Together, we can create a community where curiosity can change the world. And now, without further ado, let's get into the video. In 1979, Ridley Scott introduced the world to one of the most influential works of horror and science fiction, Alien: The Eighth Passenger. The film's success is largely due to how the horror is built, through silence, darkness, and suggestion. Instead of putting the monster on full display, Scott chose to keep the xenomorph hidden in the shadows, revealing only fragments of its form. This choice created a constant atmosphere of fear, where the threat always seemed present, yet never fully visible. However, there was a film scene that almost compromised all this meticulous construction. During the death of the character Lambert, a long take was shot where the xenomorph appears moving in an unusual way. It approached on all fours in a movement similar to a crab before rising into a clearly human-like stance. The image revealed more than it should have, and worse, made the monster visibly look like an actor in a costume. The carefully built tension up to that point could have been instantly replaced by awkward laughter. The problem with that scene wasn't just aesthetic, but symbolic. By showing too much, the film risked demystifying its greatest weapon, the unknown. The threat would stop being an unnameable creature from space and become simply a man in a suit crawling through a dark hallway. Could the atmosphere of terror be maintained after something like that? The doubt lingered until Ridley Scott made his choice. The cut was spot on. By completely removing the crab walk scene, the director ensured that the xenomorph remained shrouded in mystery, its presence more felt than seen. This decision was a masterstroke in narrative intelligence, showing that in horror, less is often more. The creature remained an enigma, a symbol of pure fear, and the audience never had the chance to relax around it. By removing just a few seconds of footage, Ridley Scott preserved the film's essence and its reputation as a genre classic. A seemingly small choice, but one that kept the monster in the shadows, exactly where it was most terrifying. Had that scene remained, would Alien have been the same? Or would it have gotten lost somewhere between horror and parody? Released in 1985, Back to the Future quickly established itself as one of the most beloved and timeless films in pop culture. Its clever plot, advanced special effects for the time, and the charisma of its protagonists helped secure its place in cinema history. But behind its impeccable shine, there were delicate post-production decisions that were fundamental to the film standing the test of time, both literally and figuratively. During the editing phase, there was a scene between Marty McFly and Doc Brown that contained a line of dialogue which raised an important red flag. In it, Marty expressed concern about what could happen to his sexuality after interacting with his own mother in the past, suggesting that these actions could lead him to go back to the future gay. At first glance, it may seem like just another line born from the peculiar humor of the 1980s, but even in that context, the creators recognized the potential harm of such an insinuation. The line could have gone unnoticed among many other jokes of the era, but director Robert Zemeckis decided it was a risk not worth taking. Including that line not only clashed with the overall tone of the film, but could also cause discomfort when re-examined through a modern lens, especially as time passed. In a work that speaks about choices, evolution, and legacy, leaving in a poorly judged joke could have compromised the message as a whole. After all, why keep something that added nothing and could still overshadow the brilliance of the rest? The decision to remove the line was surgical. Without it, the scene flows naturally, and Marty continues to be presented as a regular teenager dealing with an extraordinary situation. The focus remains on the comedic tension of time travel, not on issues that could be seen as offensive or dated. The film gained even more strength by being purged of elements that, even if small, had the power to tarnish its reputation over the years. If that line had remained, would today's audience still see Back to the Future as a practically perfect film? Or would that single unfortunate choice have left a permanent mark on its narrative? Zemeckis bet on good sense, and the result was an even more universal story. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is remembered as a vibrant and irreverent snapshot of 1980s youth, with its charismatic protagonist defying rules and savoring freedom like few others. Ferris Bueller became a symbol of youthful carefreeness, and the film earned cult status for its light tone, iconic scenes, and sharp dialogue. However, a single line nearly compromised all of that and had to be hastily cut after an unexpected reaction during test screenings. The problematic scene occurred right after the famous parade through the streets of Chicago. Sloane, Ferris's girlfriend, made a seemingly innocent comment that carried a clearly disparaging tone. She said that a girl can always drop out of a baby and get a guy to support her, implying that men have it tougher in life. The line not only clashed with the film's optimistic tone, but also came across as uninformed and offensive, especially in the eyes of younger female audiences. During test screenings, the overall reception to the film was positive, until that moment. Almost unanimously, young female viewers reacted negatively to Sloane's line. Their comments on feedback cards clearly showed the damaging impact of that single piece of dialogue. The overall performance in female demographic ratings dropped dramatically, catching the attention of studio executives. A line that might have gone unnoticed in a different era became a real obstacle to the audience's emotional connection with the characters. Even though producers argued that the line was meant to be ironic, not a validation of that outdated mindset, the public's interpretation was what really mattered. The decision was made, the line would be removed, and once it was cut, female approval scores jumped by about 40 points. The change was considered one of the most effective ever seen in a test screening by then Paramount Vice President Lindsay Doran. If that line had remained, would it have been possible to preserve the charm of a film that to this day is seen as a celebration of the teenage spirit? Or would it have left a small crack in a work that's always been about lightness, freedom, and relatability? Sometimes a single off-key comment can tarnish even the most captivating of smiles. When Kevin Smith wrote and directed Clerks, he wasn't just making a low-budget comedy, he was creating a raw, hilarious, and ironic portrayal of the daily grind of dead-end jobs. Shot in black and white and packed with sharp dialogue, the film won over the independent film scene of the 1990s, largely due to its authenticity. But the film's most important cut wasn't technical or about timing, it was narrative. The decision to remove the original ending completely changed the film's impact on the public imagination. In the initial version, the character Dante, already exhausted after another long day at the convenience store, was surprised by a robber. Without warning, he was shot and killed behind the counter, ending the film with blunt, meaningless violence. The scene was written and filmed by Smith as a deliberate anticlimax to reflect the tragic randomness of life. But after screening this version to friends and peers in the indie scene, the reaction was unanimous. It simply didn't fit the tone of the rest of the film. Throughout the entire movie, the intention was to highlight the absurdity of small, everyday tragedies, like being called into work on your day off or having to deal with impossible customers. Ending that story with Dante's unexpected death not only broke the rhythm, but also sent a message that clashed with the rest of the film. Was this a movie about the funny absurdity of life, or about the random cruelty of fate? Kevin Smith, still a novice director at the time, had the sensitivity to recognize the disconnect. He decided to cut the final minute and end the story a little earlier, with Dante simply closing the register after a conversation with Randall. This new ending reinforced the film's cynical yet lighthearted tone. Audiences left the screening with a smile on their faces and an almost inevitable connection to the characters, not with a feeling of mourning for a protagonist who had just been senselessly murdered. By making that cut, Smith not only preserved the spirit of the film, but also paved the way for the birth of an entire cinematic universe, the so-called Viewist universe, which would later include Dogma, Chasing Amy, and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. If Dante had died there, what else might have died with him? Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey was a bold and chaotic sequel to the duo's first film, two of the most eccentric characters to grace 1980s cinema. While the original explored time travel with a light and carefree tone, the sequel dove headfirst into themes like evil robots, the afterlife, and existential confrontations. But despite all the bizarre elements in the plot, there was still an unspoken limit to how far the film could go, and it almost crossed it. At one point in the film, the robotic doppelgangers of Bill and Ted confront Missy, Bill's stepmother, who had been the subject of running jokes since the first movie. Originally, the scene showed Bill punching Missy in the face to knock her out. The hit was direct, and even though the villains were evil robots, violence against a woman in a light and comedic film created instant discomfort. The scene completely clashed with the film's tone and would have had a significantly negative impact. Director Pete Hewitt noticed the problem during post-production. Instead of reshooting, he revisited the raw footage in search of alternatives. That's when he found a small moment improvised by Alex Winter, the actor who plays Bill. In one of the takes, Winter simply blows on Missy's face in an exaggerated and almost cartoonish manner, and the actress faints in response. With that clip in hand, Hewitt opted to remove the punch and dub a new line for Ted, saying "evil breath" to explain the fainting in an absurd and surprisingly effective way. This solution maintained the absurd tone the film was already carrying, and the audience didn't bat an eye. After all, we're talking about evil robots who compete with death in board games and travel through heaven and hell. In that universe, evil breath seems almost plausible. But what seemed like just a visual gag actually avoided a controversy that could have negatively impacted the franchise's legacy. Had the original scene made it to theaters, the film's humor would have been overshadowed by a gratuitous and unacceptable act of aggression. Is it worth sacrificing a story's tone for a poorly placed joke? Thankfully, the answer was a clear no, and the film moved forward crazier but much smarter. American History X is remembered as a brutal portrait of radicalization and the possibility of transformation. Directed by Tony Kaye and featuring a powerful performance by Edward Norton, the film follows the journey of Derek Vineyard, a former neo-Nazi who tries to save his brother from the grip of extremism after undergoing a personal awakening in prison. The film ends with a strong and symbolic scene: the murder of young Danny, Derek's brother, who dies as a consequence of a cycle of hatred that wasn't broken in time. However, this was not the ending originally envisioned by Tony Kaye. In his initial version, the film continued after Danny's murder. Derek appears at home, shaving his head again in front of the mirror, and then picks up a gun. The moment was silent, but symbolic. Instead of solidifying his transformation, Derek seemed ready to plunge once again into the abyss he had spent the entire film trying to escape. The gesture implied that his entire journey of redemption had been in vain. This version was not well received. It cast doubt on all the dramatic development of the protagonist, and, even more troubling, conveyed a nihilistic message that no matter how much someone tries to change, the system will always pull them back. It was an ending that nullified the emotional weight of what came before, replacing impact with shock. Even though it aimed to be provocative, The alternate ending felt more like a cheap twist than a coherent conclusion. Was this really the best path for a story about rehabilitation and awareness? The studio, alongside Edward Norton, advocated for cutting the scene. They believed the strength of the film lay in leaving the audience to reflect on the consequences of actions rather than offering a grim twist that threw away the protagonist's transformation. The decision to end the narrative with Derek cradling his brother's lifeless body was painful, but infinitely more powerful. It marked the conclusion of a journey filled with difficult choices, not the beginning of a new spiral of destruction. By eliminating that final moment, American History X found a balance between tragedy and hope. The question that lingers at the end is inevitable. Is it possible to break the cycle of hatred even when the past keeps returning? The cut ensured that the answer wasn't denied before it could even be sought. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, directed by Peter Jackson, is renowned for its respectful fidelity to the original work by J.R.R. Tolkien, even with the adaptations required for cinema. In The Two Towers, the grandeur of the Battle of Helm's Deep became a landmark in modern cinema with epic choreography, detailed environments, and an ever-building emotional charge. However, an initially planned element nearly compromised the harmony of this decisive moment: the presence of the elf Arwen in combat. In the books, Arwen does not participate in the battle, but Jackson, seeking to give more prominence to the character portrayed by Liv Tyler, decided to include her in the sequence, filming scenes where the elf fights alongside the men of Rohan. Her participation was intended to strengthen the romantic arc with Aragorn and expand her role in the story. But as he realized the scope of what he was about to do, the director had an instinct that would change everything. Even before finalizing the cut, Jackson decided to test public reception. He intentionally released an image of Arwen on the battlefield, dressed for war. The response came quickly and clearly. Tolkien fans were deeply dissatisfied. Many accused the director of distorting the character's essence, while others feared that the focus of the scene would shift entirely. The internet, even in its early days, reacted strongly. And Jackson listened. The decision was made. All scenes of Arwen at Helm's Deep would be removed. Although her presence can still be spotted in background shots that couldn't be fully erased, her active participation was completely cut. With this, the film preserved the battle's weight as a desperate human effort, where the elves present are sent by Elrond, but Arwen remains absent, staying true to her role as a spiritual guardian of hope, not a warrior. This seemingly small cut prevented the film's most intense sequence from becoming a target of purist criticism and allowed the story to remain cohesive. After all, how far is it worth altering the source material in the name of representation? In this case, the answer came with balance. Arwen would have her moments, but not at the expense of the fidelity to one of Tolkien's most iconic chapters. In an attempt to continue one of science fiction's most iconic franchises, Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines was released in 2003 with the challenge of preserving the essence of the saga started by James Cameron. Although the third film received mixed reviews, it still carried solid elements such as rising tension and dilemmas about fate and free will. But there was one scene that, had it been kept, would have completely destabilized the tone of the narrative: the introduction of Sergeant Candy. This scene, filmed as internal promotional material for the fictional company Cyber Research Systems, showed a corporate video explaining the creation of the T-800 model. In it, a burly man with a strong Southern accent and a military demeanor introduces himself as Sergeant William Candy. The implied revelation was that the physical appearance of the T-800 had been based on this real person. So far, it seemed like a fun bit of trivia. However, the most controversial moment came when a company executive commented that the sergeant's voice didn't work well, and another responded, "We can fix that," followed by a dubbed version in Arnold Schwarzenegger's iconic Austrian accent. The original intention seemed satirical, a way to joke about the unexplained accent of the Terminator. But the effect was quite different. The scene plunged the film into an almost comedic tone, completely clashing with the dramatic tension that dominated the rest of the story. Viewers would go from frantic chases and discussions about impending apocalypse to a visual gag bordering on absurdity. Could the dark tone be recovered after that? Director Jonathan Mostow realized the problem during the editing phase. The scene, while creative, represented a drastic tonal shift. Its inclusion threatened to throw off the entire balance of the film, turning what should have been a constant threat into a caricature. The decision was to remove it completely from the final cut, though it was included as bonus content in DVD editions. By eliminating Sergeant Candy, Rise of the Machines preserved what little seriousness still held up its narrative. The question remains, how far can you joke about your own universe without disfiguring it? In this case, the line was clearly identified, and the cut saved more than just a scene. It preserved the franchise's integrity. The Devil Wears Prada quickly established itself as one of the major successes of contemporary cinema. With an engaging narrative, snappy dialogue, and memorable performances, the film introduced the world to the imposing figure of Miranda Priestly, played by Meryl Streep. Cold, calculating, and incredibly powerful, Miranda is at the center of a story that revolves around ambition, vanity, and power. But there was a moment, filmed and later cut, that almost jeopardized the carefully crafted image. During a glamorous gala event, Miranda faces a delicate moment with her husband, who appears visibly intoxicated and disrespectfully confronts the president of Elias Clark Publishing. As the tension rises, Andy, her assistant, discreetly intervenes to defuse the situation, diverting the executive's attention and preventing a scandal. Miranda then looks at Andy and silently mouths a thank you. The moment is subtle, but it would have significantly changed the audience's perception of the character. Including that scene would have shown a vulnerable, grateful, and above all human Miranda. The problem is that, at that point in the story, the audience wasn't yet ready to see that side of her. Miranda's strength lay precisely in her impenetrable facade, her almost mythological coldness within the fashion world. By showing such direct gratitude, the character risked losing part of her dominant aura. David Frankel, the film's director, recognized that the scene, while well acted and interesting on its own, interfered with the emotional balance of the plot. It was too early to soften Miranda, and that would have weakened the impact of her later decisions. The audience needed to see her as a force of nature, unshakable and strategic, until subtler nuances could be revealed through her actions, not by an explicit display of vulnerability. Cutting the silent thank you was essential to maintain the tension between Miranda and Andy and preserve the editor-in-chief's dominant image. Would the film have had the same impact if its most iconic character had shown fragility at that moment? The cut kept intact the mystery that made Miranda one of the most fascinating figures in modern cinema. In Broges, directed by Martin McDonagh, is a rare example of balance between dark humor, existential drama, and biting irony. Set in the city of Broges, Belgium, the film tells the story of two hitmen in a kind of forced exile while grappling with moral dilemmas and the consequences of past mistakes. Amid all the comedic strangeness and emotional weight, the antagonist Harry Waters, played by Ralph Fiennes, stands out as a symbol of rigid, yet contradictory morality. But a flashback originally included almost disrupted that careful balance. The cutscene featured a young Harry, played by Matt Smith, storming into a police station with a katana and, without ceremony, decapitating an officer. The intention seemed to be to show the origin of Harry's brutality and how his twisted values were forged early on. However, the result was drastically different. The sequence bordered on the absurd, completely clashing with the tone of the rest of the film. With visuals more akin to a violent comic book than a psychological drama, the flashback felt out of place. Visually, the scene still had unfinished effects, which emphasized its artificiality. But even if completed, the bigger issue was conceptual. The audience, accustomed to the film's subtle humor and careful character development, would have struggled to accept such an exaggerated scene. Would it really make sense in this film's universe to show a character who, years later, seems more methodical and rational, committing such an explosive and theatrical act in his youth? Martin McDonagh, known for his precision in building atmosphere, realized that the scene not only failed to add depth, but actually reduced Harry's complexity. Instead of leaving space for the audience to fill in the blanks of the character's past, the flashback imposed a crude and graphic explanation. By removing it, McDonagh preserved the mystery and tonal balance that make the film a unique entry in its genre. The cut allowed the audience to keep oscillating between tension and uneasy laughter, exactly as the director intended. Had that severed head flown across the screen, would the carefully constructed Castle McDonagh built have collapsed? In this case, the katana stayed sheathed, and the story gained strength from what it chose not to show. What these 10 films have in common goes beyond success, critical acclaim, or the stars who lead their stories. All of them went through decisions almost invisible to the public, yet absolutely crucial for their creative survival. A cut here, a line removed there, and what could have been a stumble turned into a masterstroke. The editing room is often where the true miracle of cinema happens, and these cases are living proof that less, more often than not, is more. Each of these editorial choices served as a kind of narrative scalpel, removing the excess without compromising the essence. And that's precisely why these works continue to live on in the audience's memory even decades later. In the end, maybe what defines a great film isn't just what's shown, but what's left out at the right moment for the right reason. If you enjoyed this journey of discoveries, don't forget to leave a like, share it with your friends, and comment down below what stood out to you. Maybe others will relate, and we can spark a great conversation. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more content where curiosity knows no limits.